from The Signature, a division of Esquire Bank Studios.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. When it comes to Islamism and the intersection between that and the neo-Bolshevik revolution, it's a real family affair for Abdul El-Sayed, the DSA candidate for Senate in Michigan. There's more and more we're learning about his sister, mom, brother. El-Sayed's sister, as I mentioned last week, we talked about it a bit, is an assistant professor of identitarian politics at University of Chicago, though she's not a real big fan of the University of Chicago, despite it being her employer.
The University of Chicago.
Oh, there you
go. Like, you know, it's a colonial landlord. Like, why would I put any of my political energy into this space? And I kind of had a little bit of disdain for like people who spent a lot of time doing that. And the genocide really collapsed that and made me realize that two things. One is that, well, my students needed me. So it was like, oh, I have to organize here to take care of my students who I do care about.
Train your students.
But I also realized, and I think this is a painful lesson that a lot of us in the Palestine Solidarity Movement have been learning, is that we don't have power. We can shift the moral authority all we want. We've won the moral question. Like that was the imperative that we've had. Done, check. Like, put Palestine in the national consciousness, we did it. Make people sympathetic to Palestine, teach the history, we did it. Like, now you have white boys on the north side of Chicago being like, hey man, free Palestine. I'm like, oh, okay, now did not see it coming.
F the University of Chicago. Well, she's doing a good job of effing the University of Chicago, it sounds like. She's also not a big fan of capitalism, meaning free enterprise, meaning free markets, meaning private property.
Capitalism is at the root of pretty much all of our social ills and has some way that it plays a lot into all the oppressions that we face. So for me, I don't see issues of sexuality or race or gender as separate from issues of economic justice. Capitalism has never really...
And then the usual Marx Engels reader blather. Nobody is more impressed than an assistant professor at the University of Chicago. Mom, we find out, Fatin El-Komi is mom's name. She worked for the Islamic American Relief Agency from 1999 till at least 2004, when the U.S. Department of Treasury linked the group to terrorism. Like in terms of funneling cash to Osama bin Laden, the Taliban, and Hamas. That was what Mom was doing, or has done previously. Interesting. More is coming out about El-Sayed himself. Old clips resurfacing. Mike Rogers has an ad contrasting himself from El-Sayed on the position with respect to the combustion engine. El-Sayed is opposed to its existence, and Mike Rogers would like the auto industry to thrive in the greater Detroit area. Mm-hmm. El-Sayed, though, back in a profile piece for a documentary, or a profile interview for a documentary when he ran for governor, wanted to make sure when they were shooting him in his private study, didn't focus too much on the books on the bookshelf.
Where's the other one?
You're going to want to not get these things in the shot.
Oh, okay. I don't think we did.
We did not. Good. Trying to keep the shot secular.
Yeah, and it's not, because he has a copy of the Quran. No, because he has the works of Dr. Abu Amina Bilal Phillips, an unindicted co-conspirator in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, who's advocated for child marriage and says wife beating is permissible so long as it's done to, quote, bring the wife back to her senses and reestablish authority. He also does, Mr. Abu Amina Bilal Phillips says that AIDS is proof that homosexuality is evil and dangerous. He's been banned from many nations in the West over his views, including the UK, Australia, Germany, and Denmark, but he did make it to al-Sayed's private collection. I'm sure it's just expansive reading because he's such a deep intellect. By the way, don't even get me started on his brother, who has security clearances and worked on, it worked for defense contractors, including Boeing, including on something related to Air Force One at some point. And then he goes on. That's Hassan Piker. I'm moving on to Hassan Piker now. Hassan Piker, al-Sayed's right-hand guy. So his brother, as I just mentioned, worked for Boeing, security clearances, worked on Air Force One projects. So Hassan Piker, who campaigned with al-Sayed and is like this number one streamer for the Islamist neo-Bolshevik set, that's his brother who participates in his streaming programs all the time. And they're all supporting, all hands on deck for al-Sayed in Michigan. Interesting. And that race, recent polling, at least Nate Silver's polling us up, statistical dead heat. Former FBI DNI Mike Rogers is in a statistical dead heat with al-Sayed and company in Michigan. That's disturbing. Zuhdi Jasser is the president and president of American Islamic Forum for Democracy, the co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement, a medical doctor, a former U.S. Navy lieutenant commander, and Republican candidate for Congress in Arizona 4. Dr. Jasser, thanks for joining us. You're an actual doctor. Thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. It's great to be with you, Dan. Thanks for having me.
So what about al-Sayed and, maybe provide some context with thinking about al-Sayed as woke 2.0, if you will, from AOC, Tlaib, Omar, and others, but those are you get where I'm going. And then now al-Sayed, this next iteration of what's happening in the context of the politics in 2026.
Yeah, this is their farm team. They've been working on them for 2 generations since the Muslim Brotherhood expanded. The Muslim Brotherhood is a political party in the Middle East. The mothership of that is Egypt, and this is where al-Sayed's Abdurrahman al-Sayed's family comes from, is Egypt, and they're political activists. And as Americans try to get your head around this, think of it in the Cold War. We had Americans that believed in a worldview of freedom and liberty, and we had Soviets that believed in the ascendancy and imperialism of the Soviet Empire. The world today, as the Soviet Empire fell apart and we still have Russia, the world today is triangulated into the West, liberty and freedom, Islamists, which believe in theocracy, and then left is the Chinese Communist Party and sort of the socialist Marxist part of that triangle. And al-Sayed, Hassan Piker, who's from Turkey, part of the AKP, Muslim Brotherhood of Turkey. Mm-hmm. You've got many of these, as you showed in some of the preface here about the Palestinian activists, the Hamas-adjacent folks who are anti-Western, anti-Semitic. Their worldview is about defeating the West. And it's not just about Islamists. Look at the Obama era, the Jeremiah Wrights that were GD America, that ultimately worked with the Nation of Islam, which was Louis Farrakhan, that was deeply anti-Semitic and anti-Western. They created an DEI movement because that then identified Muslims as an identity movement and not as an ideology, and thus it snuck it under. This is how al-Sayed can be neck and neck with an American patriot like Mike Rogers, because the left is being duped into thinking this is about an aggrieved minority that's been oppressed, it's oppressor versus oppressed mentality. So as a result, al-Sayed claims to be all about socialism, and I've seen this movie before in the Middle East, in Syria and Egypt. They ride socialism like a parasite on the back of the rear of a horse or a donkey for the Democratic Party, and then once they get in, they dismiss it because they're hypocrites. Al-Sayed's wife is a psychiatrist who doesn't even take Medicare. She's on a concierge psychiatrist, and yet he claims he wrote the book on Medicare for All, and his book, if you have the stomach to read it, doesn't have any solutions. It just claims what the problem is, and you can just solve it through entitlement programs. That's why, one of the reasons I'm running is to expose the fact that the firewall against this are American principles. What you can find that all these folks share is a common worldview against the West, demonizing Israel, demonizing the Jewish community, anti-Semitic deeply, but they're not open about what they're for. That's why, if you look, the Al-Sayeds of the world never claim what they're for about free markets, entrepreneurship, home ownership, the American dream, all these things that are free speech. They never work in the mosques like I have to counter the misogyny, the anti-Semitism, the Islamic law texts that say kill those who leave Islam, all these things that are rife in the text of the mosques in Dearborn and elsewhere. This guy hasn't said a word about. In fact, he's not only Hamas adjacent, he hasn't even said hardly anything, let alone criticism post-October 7, maybe made a couple statements, but didn't talk about the root causes, which what makes him not only a liability, but really he could even get a security clearance to be a tour guide at a government facility, and yet he's running for Senate without any vetting about the ideas and the worldview that radicalizes our communities.
Some on the left are trying to treat these DSA candidates, the Islamists like Sayed, as anomalies. It's not a big deal. I mean, James Carville is a good example of somebody who's very confused. He doesn't sort of know which position to take. On the one hand, he says, basically, I'm leaving the party if this continues. On the other hand, he said it's no big deal. These are one-offs. So which is it? Is it a threat to the party or isn't it? But I look at this on a continuum. And it's like, how many one-offs do you need to see before it becomes something more than a one-off? And I just wonder, you have basically people that come to this coalition, as you said, sort of the coalition of those who find solidarity in self-described marginality, whether it's true or not, mostly untrue. But they come to the table with from different totalitarian perspectives, but they share a commitment to totalitarianism. You see it with, of course, when it comes to things like Danish cartoonists, we know where the Islamists are coming from. But it's the same thing. It can be something as simple as a mom and a daughter going to a WNBA game and being told you can't wear an XXXY T-shirt because that's offensive. It's the same thing during COVID. The censorious nature of these totalitarians, whether they're of an Islamist flavor or another flavor. I mean, do you see this going somewhere where the idea of Dearborn, what's happened in Dearborn, Michigan, which you just mentioned, could actually be scaled to metropolitan areas? Maybe even beyond that, the kind of candidates you're seeing emerging in the Midwest, of course. This isn't just for, very committed leftist big city metro areas. You have statewide candidates now in Midwestern states. They're centrist states like Wisconsin and Michigan. Where do you see, what's your threat assessment? What's the danger? Where could this go and how quickly?
We could lose our country in one generation, and then the next, 2 or 3 election cycles. And it's not that this is not fear mongering, Dan. Listen, the Jamal Abdel Nassers, the dictators of the Middle East in the 50s and 60s, they used to use the foil of the Muslim Brotherhood as the problem, and the dictators rose to power saying, I was going to feed you through socialism, through helping the aggrieved. And there's no difference when the Obamas of the world are calling Mamdani and congratulating him openly in order to get the power. They show this synergy of identity movements together, and what they share is this economic grievance mentality of we are going to help those who are not being provided for by society. And yet it's demagoguery because in this podcastistan mentality where folks are just, the more radical their comments are, the more they sort of get chuckled off to the sides. That ends up driving their ship. So every American should be concerned. When I testified to Peter King's hearings in 2011 and kept telling them, listen, I know there's only 5-6 million Muslims in America and you're not too worried about this, but they're going to radicalize your parties. They're going to do it on the left and the right. And we're seeing it on both sides right now with some anti-Semitism. But it's much more so on the left because they're much more into identity politics rather than individualism. So at the end of the day, this is the issue, is that in the Middle East, you see the far left synergistically rise to power through demagoguery, almost a populism that tells the people what they want to hear. But then once they install in Iran, let me give you a good example. In 1979, the revolution of the Islamists was buoyed by the Marxists, the Tudeh Party, Tudeh. Look it up. The Tudeh Party came to power with the Islamists. Within a couple years, the Tudeh Party was outlawed by the Islamists, and they were hanging from cranes in 1983 in Tehran. So this is the issue, is the left, if you love America, whether you're left of center, far, or in the middle, the Islamists don't care about you. As you saw with the professor you just said from the University of Chicago, they will use their ideas to come to sort of prominence as grievance individuals with a platform and a microphone, and yet they don't really understand what they're for. That's why the coalition I formed, the Clarity Coalition, champions for liberty, clarity, against the rise of Islamist tyranny. So it's not only what they're against. We're against Islamism, but we're for liberty. And we've formed coalitions of gay rights activists, feminists, and others. There are so many values that the left has, free speech, freedom of religion, etc., that we want to be able to celebrate. And the El Sayeds of the world are a warning to the rest of us, is that, listen, if you give them the vehicle of your party, they're going to ride it in, and then we're going to lose our country because they don't care about the Constitution. They care about Islamic law. They care about Marxist law. That's what they care about.
Well, and the point you made earlier, too, I just want to emphasize about the sort of Trojan horse nature of the way they run these campaigns, particularly when they get to a general election after, sort of the base plus approach in the primary, because that's where all the energy is, and that's all they needed to get to the general election. Hassan Piker with Mehdi Hassan, talking about Hassan Piker walking back his comments from a few years ago that America deserved 9/11. Listen to their exchange about quote unquote walking that comment back.
The classic one they throw you. America deserved 9/11.
Yeah.
You've withdrawn that comment, I believe.
Yeah, I said it in 2019, and if you listen to the full conversation, you very quickly understand what I'm talking about.
You're talking about foreign policy blowback.
Yeah, we're talking about foreign policy blowback.
But you could have phrased it better, because it sounds like you're saying people deserve to die.
Of course,
we don't believe that.
Again, in 2019, and then immediately I'm all over Fox News and getting an unbelievable amount of death threats. I'm a big boy; I can handle it. It is what it is. But I went on the Young Turks and famously was like, I should have phrased things better. I apologize for those who I've offended, and I most importantly apologize for giving an opportunity to the right to just use this against me.
This is a 7-year-old clip that you've already explained disowned. I have the same issue. There are clips of me that I've had to talk about.
Yeah, I'm sure there are, matey. We've played them. But here's the thing. So it was 2019. That was 18 years after 9/11. And that's his formulation. It wasn't like it was an immediate hot take. And he's angry or ignorant or. I mean, this is who he is and what he's been doing. But the key was that to your point, Zuhdi, is the last thing he said, which is it gave the right fodder. And I need to be more careful about what he's saying is I need to be careful about what I actually think, because we want this to be a sneak attack.
Yeah, never once do they really feel, and this is what I've said at mosques and debates across the country from Columbus to Dearborn and elsewhere. I've told them, I said, listen, you can't just dismiss comments. Mehdi Hassan was a Holocaust denier and then denied saying that, and then said other things that were egregious about the Jewish community, and then he denies it. The bottom line is when have they ever defended America's righteousness against the Taliban? When has Hassan Piker ever said that Al-Qaeda and ISIS is is evil, and the imams like Awlaki, who was radicalized in America, had been at many of the mosques that their families have also been to, from San Diego to Fairfax and Chicago. Many of the mosques that supported Hamas and raised money with the Holy Land Foundation, they never exposed and articulated a contrary worldview. So they can try to white out a few lines that they said. And as I've always told the Saudis when I was on the U.S. Commission on Religious Freedom, I said, okay, you guys can remove some of your translations, but where's your advocacy for the principles that are Western? Equality, liberalism, free markets, property ownership, women's rights, all these things that they never advocate for really expose who they are. And they get caught on a hot mic on a few things that are just horrifically egregious, but at the end of the day, their worldview is incompatible with Americanism, and that's the debate now. Because what radicalizes the kids that are listening to the millions listening to Hassan Piker and El Sayed is an idea that America is the evil, that Israel is evil, rather than being the little America in the Middle East. Because they don't have a positive love and passion for our country and our allies, it ends up radicalizing and excusing violence. And that's why he has no business, is unfit for being in politics and in the Senate, and why we need a firewall like me in Congress, because I can immediately end the argument and say, you know what? In the Middle East, these guys are tyrants, and most of the Muslims in Egypt and elsewhere don't want them. They reject them. But yet here, they get lifted up by the politically correct movements as being somehow representative of our community in a bigotry of low expectations. So we need to put folks in the conservative way and in independent movements like myself installed in Congress. And this is why my website is z4az.com. If you want to change the narrative and end this argument, we need alternatives so that the identity movement is exposed immediately.
Yeah, and again, what El Sayed's sister said about bros on the north side of Chicago, white bros on the north side of Chicago wearing keffiyehs and saying "Free Palestine." No, we did it. We're there. That should. She's right. That's what should concern you. Is the point?
Exactly, and they have snowed the sort of unaware university student that had encampments for Palestine, and they couldn't figure out what was the Mexican, Italian, or Palestinian flag, and they got confused by it because they didn't really care about what the reality of the policies were, why Hamas was not releasing the hostages, why Hamas had a doctrine that said kill a Jew behind every stone, why Hamas was part of a movement of theocratic Islam stuck in the 11th century. No, it was all the Muslims that were the victim and the Jews that were the problem, et cetera. So, this is a disease that we need to treat internally as a Muslim community, but also as a country. The Democrat Party needs to have a reckoning in which it says it's not enough just to say these are, like you said, one-offs. No, there is a movement that has ingested your party, that you are right. Pete Buttigieg, Axelrod, others are campaigning for El Sayed. They are Hamas adjacent now. Their entire party is socialist adjacent. The guy I'm running against here in Arizona, Greg Stanton, is part of the future frontier leaders of the Democrat Party, and yet never makes a speech against socialism. Didn't want to sign the Democrat Party promise to America. Only 4 or 5 Democrats signed it, and all it says is we're patriots. We believe in free markets and capitalism, and we believe in a strong national security. That is enough to make a rational Democrat Party. We can disagree about all the other things. So it's amazing to me that nobody's holding their party accountable. They're just sort of riding it in because they want power and politics of position.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement, former U.S. Navy lieutenant commander, and as he mentioned, Republican candidate for Congress, Z4AZ, Z the number 4, AZ, Z4AZ.com is his website. Dr. Jasser, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Anytime. Thanks, Dan.
And Dr. Jasser joined us on the alphawealthgroup.com answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
It's news, opinion, and insight at the speed of your life. Streaming at 560theanswer.com on the AM 560 mobile app, or tell your smart speaker to play The Answer